Hello, class. Welcome to 11th grade American History. I will be your teacher, Zachary Kolb. And today we will be going over kind of a unique social movement, and we'll discuss what social movement specifically means as I share my slides and we go over vocabulary here in a minute. But it is the social movement called the social gospel movement. It happened in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And we're really going to be looking at the causes of the movement, the effects of the movement, and the beliefs of the movement. And it's kind of a content heavy lesson, so we're going to try to go through it quickly. And there are two links down below, as well as my email. The first link is to a Jamboard where there will be 4 slides. So at different portions throughout the video, I'm going to ask you to pause the video and go over to the Jamboard and answer the question with a sticky note. And then there's also the slide link. So the slides that you see me going through, those are available to you if you want to come back and look at the slides yourself. And then my email will be for the homework assignment later on that I'll talk about. So let me share my screen real quick and we will get started. Okay, so social gospel movement. These are the standards that we're going to be covering today. You don't have to worry about these. I just want to show you that these are the California standards of what we're trying to hit today. So we get the social gospel movement out of this standard, talking about the role religion played in the founding of America, its lasting morale, and then specifically going over the great religious revivals, First Great Awakening, Second Great Awakening, and then you can see right here the social gospel movement. So that's what we'll be talking about today. Our ELD standard will be condensing ideas in a few basic ways to create precise and detailed, simple, compound, and complex sentences. So in the Jamboard, as well as the homework assignment that we'll go over later, just really work on your sentence structure as best as you can. Try to have really, really good simple sentences. And if you choose to do complex or compound sentences, make sure that the thought is well-rounded and that it makes sense and is easy to follow. Our daily objective for everyone, our main goal at the end of this lesson, is for you to be able to describe the causes, beliefs, and lasting effects of the social gospel movement that took place between 1880 and 1925. So just remember those 3 things: what caused it, what were their core beliefs, and what were the lasting effects. And there are lasting effects even until today, which we'll cover. So here's the link for the Jamboard. As I said, it's also in the description below that you can click on, and you'll see whenever I hit a point where I want you to go answer a question, I'll give instructions at that point. But there is the link for you, and then homework instructions will be given later. So what is a social movement? There are many different forms of social movements, and they've taken place in many different countries over centuries. This specific movement is one of the first, or at least one of the big first movements that happened in America. And social movements often fight for equality, equity, or personal rights. We see that with the civil rights movement. We see that with the counterculture movement, which is our view of hippies today, what they fought for. We see that with the feminist movement and a variety of others, that their main goal is in some area of life, they're fighting for equality, equity, or personal rights. There is often religious and non-religious reasons for people participating in these movements. This one specifically, the social gospel movement, it is entirely based on religious belief. So the social gospel movement is a social movement or fight for equality and equity through different claims of Christianity. And remember, this took place in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And we'll talk about one of the causes for its end is World War I, which took place around 1916, 1917, 18, 1919. So right at the end of when this movement died out. WWJD, if we had the opportunity to be in person, I would ask and clarify that you guys know what WWJD means. It's an old acronym that really stems back to this movement in the early 1900s, and it stands for What Would Jesus Do? And it really talks about, and we'll cover this in future slides, covers the heart of what the people in this movement were trying to address. So the question, what would Jesus do, is they see these social ills around them, whether it's hungry or poor or hurting. And their way of addressing it is asking people, what would Jesus do if they saw these issues? How would he respond? And by answering that question, you should respond in the same way. So that's really what that movement was all about. The lasting effects today, we can still see the YMCA. There's recreational buildings all over the United States that give access to different things like gyms or basketball courts, tennis courts, swimming, and people have the opportunity to go to a recreational center, have a place to go for not very expensive. Then there's the Salvation Army. They're famous for their thrift store and providing clothes for people. And then no child labor. You can see some of the pictures of the child labor back in the 1900s. And we don't see that anymore. That was one of the big fights of the social gospel movement. And then just regulated work in general. It was during a time of industrialization, which we'll talk about in our vocab. And there was just a lot of danger and a lot of injury and death with the industrialization. So they fought for the regulation of work. So here are our terms. The lesson terms are social reform. Social reform is just looking for a positive change. That's what a social movement is all about, is looking for social reform. So a reform is an instance of change or improvement. And you can have those improvements through the law, the social system, or institution that's implementing them. The gospel specifically means good news, but in the way that we see it today, they're talking about specifically the teachings of Jesus Christ. So what Jesus Christ is famous for teaching, those are their reasons for participating in the movement and trying to help people. All the people in this movement, or at least most of the people, are Protestants. Those are followers of the Western Church. So whenever the Roman Catholic Church split and we had the Reformation, which we talked about in world history last year, whenever the Reformation happened, that created the Western Church. So as you drive around town and you see churches, there is a very, very, very high likelihood that the church is Protestant because it's a part of the Western Church. Theology is just the study of God and religious belief. This is once again just their reasoning for participating in this movement. Salvation, this will get talked about a little bit more throughout the lesson. Salvation is specifically the preservation or deliverance from harm or ruin, deliverance from sin. It's the example of going to heaven. Whenever you have salvation, you go to heaven. And they believed in two different types of salvation. There's personal salvation, going to heaven, and then there is social salvation. And that's kind of like bringing heaven down to earth, trying to fix what's here on earth. And then there's urbanization, the process of making an area more urban or city-like. This often creates poorer areas, as well as wealth gaps and issues like that. Then there is industrialization, the development of industries in a country. That's industrialization leads to urbanization typically. And that creates the harsh work environments and everything that I mentioned before. And disparity just means a large difference. So there is a large wealth disparity. So the people who were rich were very rich. The people who were not were very much not rich. So these are our terms. A lot of you might already be familiar with them, but feel free to write those down and keep those in your notes. So this is the first place to pause and go to the Jamboard and answer the question, what time period did the social gospel movement take place and what was the goal? There's a little spell check there, not what, but what was the goal? So remember to put your last name on the sticky note and answer that on this first slide. So go ahead and press pause now and write out your answer. Okay, now that you're done writing out that, we'll continue on to the Gilded Age. The Gilded Age is really the thing that brought about the social gospel movement. It started right in the middle of the Gilded Age. So you can see right here from the 1870s to 1900 was the Gilded Age. That's industrialization. This is kind of a famous image of all the factories and the smoke taking over. That's what it was all about. There's also the railroad. That was a famous project during industrialization. So there was a massive influx of European immigrants. So there was a lot of people looking for work, a lot of people who couldn't have work, a huge expansion of the workforce, a huge expansion of industrialization, nowhere for people to live. That added to the wealth gap. And industrialization led led to urbanization once again, bad work environments because of surplus of willing and able workers. So regulated work was something that we got later on after this movement, but one big reason that regulated work was not needed was because there's so many willing and able workers. So as soon as someone got injured or died, you could just bring on another immigrant to take over that job. So that was the Gilded Age, and it was the cause of industrialization and urbanization that led to the social gospel movement. So here's number 2, to press pause real quick on Jamboard. What was the primary cause of the social gospel movement? Go ahead and press pause now and come right back. Okay, moving on to specifically the social gospel movement. The leaders we're not going to be too focused on, but here's a slide for them if you want to come back to and really learn more about them. We're going to focus mostly on this guy right here that you see in the bottom right-hand corner, Walter Rauschenbusch. His name is very hard to pronounce. He's a New York pastor and theologian. And I'm going to focus on his quote right here. He says, the duty of Christians is not a matter of getting individuals to heaven, but of transforming the life on earth into the harmony of heaven. So that's that social salvation. In order for them to get to heaven and have personal salvation, they need to bring heaven to earth and have social salvation. So they were very focused on how do they solve issues here on earth and create social salvation. And then most people in this movement were liberal Protestants, excluding some outliers, but just like politically, people have conservative views and liberal views. Most people in this movement were liberal Protestants. The belief system, the kingdom of God required social salvation. So once again, in order for them to have personal salvation and go to heaven, the kingdom of God or their theology, how they read the Bible required that they bring social salvation. They thought the industrialized society would be better if the Bible was applied throughout all the different relationships of charity and justice and how you deal with other people. And they emphasized serving, healing, and helping one's neighbor. That was their entire goal, was helping people around them. And they used a large variety of means to accomplish this. That's churches, homeless shelters, reform organizations, specifically businesses that they would partner with or create that would go in and try to help people. Halfway houses for people who could be drunk or addicted to drugs and trying to get better. There's health clinics and so much more. A lot of the helpful resources we see today stem from the design of the social gospel movement. And their challenging question to other Christians would be, how could you call yourself a Christian and not wage war against social issues? They thought it was absolutely needed. So the end of the movement really started to come on with World War I. You can see in this bottom left-hand picture. World War I was the first time where people, they just weren't focused on helping their neighbor. It was a time when everyone was so focused on getting through it themselves. A lot of people were off at war or their family members were off at war. And that kind of started the decline of the movement. And then when the war ended and people came back, the belief system of social reform and fighting for social issues kind of spread into different political and academic atmospheres. So you can see a picture of the feminist movement here. Here's the counterculture movement down here, make love, not war. Martin Luther King Jr. Down in the bottom picture. These are all examples, and you can see beliefs that they have that go all the way back to the social gospel movement. A lot of people think that the social gospel movement happened to increase church size. That's ironic because if that was their real goal, they failed because there was no increase in the Protestant church numbers. And then they won the war against social Darwinism thought, which was only the strong survive. Social gospel focused more on helping the needy. And another big reason why the movement ended was leaders in the movement disagreed on what was the best way to move forward. Having a socialist society, a capitalist society, or a communist society, everyone had different opinions, and it kind of just broke up the leadership and broke up the movement. So the social gospel today, you can see examples of goodwill. It's kind of like the Salvation Army. You can see food banks, women's rights, and then here's American Red Cross disaster relief going into disastrous territories after like a hurricane and trying to help people get back on their feet. And then even something like Black Lives Matter. You can see some of the things that they are preaching can stem back to the social gospel movement. and trying to fight for social justice and trying to fight for social reform. Even though it's not under the social gospel movement, a lot of them share similar aspects. So you can see it from all around us today. So go ahead and press pause one last time and go to number 3 and 4 on the Jamboard and answer number 3, what caused the movement to end in the 1920s? And then number 4, how do you personally see the effects of the social gospel movement today? And feel free to just share personally. There's no right or wrong answer, but what are some areas in life that you see today? So go ahead and press pause and go do that. Okay, and then lastly is the homework for this lesson. You'll have 3 days to turn it in for full credit, and you will be emailing it to me. You can either type it on a Microsoft Word document, a Google Doc, or I'm even going to allow you guys to do it by hand and then take a picture of it and send it to me to my email. But if you write it by hand, you have to have good handwriting. I'm not going to spend an unbelievable amount of time trying to read your handwriting. So just make sure that you write well if you do it by hand. And there's going to be 2 sets of in-depth questions. So make sure you pay attention to these questions. The questions include describe the belief system of most of the participants in the social gospel movement and 2 of the leaders. So what was their belief system? Who were the leaders? What was their overall goal as well as their daily goals? So what was their big goal and how did they try to accomplish that day by day? What did they think was necessary for personal salvation? And then how did they go about trying to solve problems and obtain their goals? And then number 2, how did industrialization and urbanization help spur on the social gospel movement? What about World War I caused the movement to start to die out? And then do you personally think the movement is dead or has ever died, considering we see so much today? So remember that there's links down below and my email's down below as well. Links to the slides for you to go back through. Feel free to watch this video again for anything that I might have said to help you with the homework. And please answer those questions on the Jamboard. And we will see you for the next lesson. Thank you for listening.